Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving right into a really fascinating source. It's excerpts from a narrative called She Came for Truth.
Yeah, and this isn't some, dry policy document. It's an account, a story painting this incredibly vivid picture of one specific event.
That event being a televised national forum. The topic: ethics in American politics, the future of it.
But the real focus, the core of this narrative, is this dramatic showdown. The source actually calls it a reckoning.
Happening live, millions watching.
Yeah.
Between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Barron Trump.
Exactly. The source really sets the scene. You've got this packed auditorium, the camera's rolling. It frames it not just as another debate, but as this potentially pivotal moment.
A moment that, at least according to this account, made people question, well, what does leadership actually mean? What does it look like?
Right. And the source gives us a lot to work with the backgrounds of Crockett and Trump, how they apparently prepared differently.
The actual clashes during the forum, and then the reactions, from the audience, the media, as it all went down.
So our mission here in this deep dive is really to unpack all of that. We want to look at those contrasting approaches described in the source.
Analyze the key arguments as this account presents them.
And dig into what this specific narrative suggests this moment revealed about, well, leadership, communication styles, and maybe the weight of lived experience in politics today.
Okay, so let's get into it. The source, right away, sets up this really stark contrast. You have Congresswoman Crockett on one side.
Described as a black woman whose path was marked by, well, struggle, defiance even.
Working 3 jobs for law school, former public defender, even worked as a hairdresser on the side.
Yeah.
The narrative really pushes this idea of someone who earned her place, not through legacy or big donations.
Mm-hmm. And then opposite her, Barron Trump, he's 19 at the time, presented as this heir to a political dynasty.
Making his public debut, apparently coached up by conservative youth think tank.
And the source mentions his team had this explicit goal, would get it out. Dominate the stage, look like a serious player.
And maybe, as the source puts it, kind of soften the family name a bit.
Right. And we get this almost behind-the-scenes look from the source at his prep, like 12 hours before, in this glass-walled room near K Street.
Strategist coaching him. The source says it felt more like a campaign war room than actual debate prep.
And they apparently knew they couldn't, quote, out-policy Congresswoman Crockett. That's what the source claims.
So the strategy described was, well, pretty direct. Rattle her.
Hit her identity, frame her success as just luck, an accident, make her look emotional, unstable.
It's quite something. The source even highlights the specific instruction they supposedly gave him. Your strength is composure, stay cool, smile.
Yeah, look like the adult in the room. Let her look like the activist. It's chilling, really.
And it gets even more specific. This handwritten flashcard mentioned in the source. Hairdresser to house floor. Underlined twice.
Intended, the source says, as his first jab. Right out of the gate to get under her skin.
Wow. So the plan, according to this account, was this personal attack disguised as a question about her background, basically implying she didn't belong.
And that's apparently exactly what happened, after some standard opening question about ethics.
He pivots, looks right at her, and asks, with this clear undertone the source notes, how someone goes from a, quote, hair salon chair to the House floor.
The source describes the effect like a dropped glass, the unspoken message being, you're not qualified, you don't belong here.
And the reaction in the room. A soft gasp, apparently, disbelief.
But Congresswoman Crockett, according to this account, she didn't flinch. Her stillness is described as formidable.
She let that silence hang. Owned it, the source says, until it got uncomfortable for everyone but her.
And her response, as quoted, is crucial. She don't speak to him, but to the room.
Explaining how it happens when a girl works 3 jobs, studies past midnight, shows up in courtrooms where no one expects her to win, but she does.
She kept going, describing this woman walking into rooms where people dismiss her as emotional or inexperienced.
And still outworks every single one of them. Powerful stuff is described.
And then the line that, according to this narrative, really landed and went viral later, looking right at him.
Described as not with anger, but with precision.
And she says, I didn't inherit a platform, Mr. Trump. I earned it.
Oof. The source mentions this soft murmur starting the crowd then. Agreement. A subtle shift in the room's energy.
And Barron Trump's planned smile. It flickered. The source notes, his eyes dropped to his notes.
The balance, according to this account, had already started to tilt.
So after that initial exchange, the narrative says Barron Trump tried to pivot, regain control. get back to what he saw as substance.
His argument being, okay, policy isn't about who struggled more, it's about results, metrics.
And he starts rattling off figures, child poverty stats, budget gaps, school performance numbers from her district.
Which, and this is critical, the source points out were conveniently sourced but suspiciously lacking context, designed to overwhelm, not clarify.
Right. Then he goes after her voting record, accusing her of blocking bipartisan bills, framing her as just an obstructionist.
The source says he paced it like a lawyer, calling her presence incidental, a prop even.
And then uses this line, "We can't keep mistaking biography for merit. Overcoming personal hardship doesn't automatically make someone a visionary."
A line, the source notes, that was actually underlined on his prep sheet for later, but he used it early. Couldn't resist, maybe.
Seems like it. And this move, according to the narrative, really upped the tension. A heavy silence, palpable discomfort in the room.
Someone quoted in the narrative apparently said, he just made a mistake. He thinks she's going to argue. She's going to educate.
Congresswoman Crockett's silence again becoming, strategic.
The source says she then responded calmly. Voice low, measured, making people lean in.
And she didn't directly counter his stats with more stats. Instead, she brought up real people, real situations.
The teacher using her own money for pencils. The grandmother raising grandkids whose local clinic got shut down because of federal budget cuts.
She countered his faceless numbers by saying she knew their names, their faces, saw them every week in grocery store lines, funeral homes, overcrowded classrooms.
And that quote the source pulls. You call that emotion, I call it representation.
Boom. Exactly. The source really drives home that she wasn't using hardship as, like, a slogan.
But as the very reason for policy. Contrasting legislating from up high versus actually seeing the mold on the floors below.
The narrative describes Barron Trump gripping his podium, that rehearsed cool visibly cracking.
She hadn't shouted, but her quiet words, those grounded examples, they spoke volumes, according to this account.
Okay, and here's where the narrative suggests things got really intense. Barron Trump makes another calculated move.
Tries to use specific policy against her, pulls out this thick stack of papers.
Or 400 pages, yeah. The proposed federal infrastructure expansion package, a bill the source notes she actually supported.
And he points to one specific clause, Section 17B, way back on page 412.
Claiming it reallocated $230 million away from vulnerable communities towards industrial corridors.
And he asks her point blank, does she endorse policy that hurts the very people she claims to represent?
The source calls the move theatric, calculated, explicitly.
And for a second, it seems like it might have worked. The source describes this pause, uncertainty in the audience.
Barron Trump apparently looked at her with a smile that just screamed, checkmate.
But, and this is the turn the narrative builds to, the source says he didn't know Jasmine, and he definitely didn't know Section 17B.
She didn't panic, didn't shuffle papers, just smiled quietly, a knowing smile.
The source says someone gives when they've read ahead in the playbook.
She steps away from her podium, walks over to the big screen showing the bill page.
Points right to the clause he mentioned, acknowledges, yes, it does reallocate funds temporarily during surplus years.
But then, and the source highlights this as the critical detail, she leans into the mic and adds,
what Mr. Trump didn't mention is footnote C.
She taps the screen, brings it up, explains it makes clear the reallocations are conditional only in emergency surplus cycles.
And automatically go back to at-risk zones once certain needs are certified.
And then comes the line that the source describes, causing actual audible gasps. Real shock.
She turns back to him, calm, level, and says, you didn't read it. I wrote it.
Just devastating, according to this account. He had no words, fingers just hovering over his document stack.
But she wasn't done. She adds that she introduced the amendment mandating quarterly reporting for transparency on this exact clause.
Ensuring public documentation, automatic reversions, an amendment that passed committee 3 weeks prior.
She returns to her podium, calm, grounded, and states, so no, Mr. Trump, I didn't overlook the clause. I strengthened it.
According to the source, this wasn't just deflecting an attack. It was a complete reclaiming of the narrative, the facts, the whole room.
He brought paper, she brought authorship, mastery.
The narrative really emphasizes how profound this was reported to be. Not just finding an error, but revealing she was the architect of the very thing he tried to use against her.
The room, the source says, was just stunned. That silence again, but different. Not tension, but understanding. Like puzzle pieces snapping together.
Barron Trump visibly searching his packet, realizing perhaps his team prepped him for optics, for performance, not for this.
Not for actual authorship, deep legislative knowledge. There wasn't a script for that.
And the audience response described as organic, powerful, not just polite clapping.
The source calls it like a tide finally breaking free, a collective recognition of something authentic.
Even the moderator, the account notes, just stared for a beat. First at her, then at Barron Trump, whose shoulders had visibly slumped.
The source sums up this part powerfully. This wasn't a debate. It was a lesson, and Jasmine Crockett had taught it line by line, fact by fact.
After that, the narrative describes Barron Trump starting to, well, unravel a bit.
His attempts to dismiss her arguments as just emotional appeals or performance art, they just fell flat, according to the source.
Accusing her of twisting facts, just wanting to go viral.
And Congresswoman Crockett's reaction sat perfectly still, expression unreadable. Her silence, again, described as deafening.
Then she stands, deliberately, the source suggests, not for show, but to speak a deeper truth.
I'm not running for viral, she states. I'm running for truth. And then, directly to him, you walked into it.
The source emphasizes this wasn't about ego or just winning a point. It was about something fundamental.
Exposing, the narrative suggests, the idea that confidence can replace character, or that inheritance means the same as an earned voice, earned expertise.
Then Congresswoman Crockett broadens her comments, talking about the feeling of being invisible.
Talking about knocking on doors, people struggling with bills, grandmothers rationing insulin, mothers losing children to violence, real stories.
She talks about people who don't care about party, they just ask, will you show up? Will you remember our names?
And she reflects on power, quoted in the source. Power isn't about volume, it's about visibility. And when you've spent your whole life being overlooked, seen is the most radical thing you can be.
At this point, according to the account, the audience didn't just clap, they stood up.
Described not to cheer, but to say, we see you, we hear you, we remember. A powerful image.
Barron Trump's last attempt to dismiss her, calling it performance art again. The narrative says the words just hit the air flat, no sting left.
And her final response, as described, no words, just a level look. Cool, unshaken.
That look alone, the source implies, dismissed the attack, showed its hollowness, reminded everyone you can't diminish someone who doesn't need your approval.
The moderator ends the forum. But the source notes, nobody rushed out. People sat with what they'd witnessed.
Congresswoman Crockett rises, described like a servant leader, addresses the camera one last time.
Says she didn't come for fireworks or spectacle, just to stand up for her people.
She mentions being underestimated again, not coming from money or a famous name, working in that hair salon.
But Cross says she didn't come to be safe or comfortable. She came for the mother worried about an inhaler, the senior working nights, the veteran in her truck.
And the source quotes her looking right into the camera, saying, they're asking if someone in Washington sees them. A beat. I do.
The source really emphasizes this wasn't about silencing him. It was about amplifying others, reminding everyone their stories matter.
And that final applause described. Roared, deep and rising, not polite or performative, but alive.
She walks off stage steadily, heels tapping. Quiet power. The narrative notes she didn't stomp to claim power. She just walked in it.
And that image, the source suggests, became iconic. Walking away, shoulders square, head high, calm. She didn't need the spotlight. She was the message.
So stepping back from this narrative, what does it all suggest? The source really hammers home this contrast, doesn't it? Inherited platform versus earned experience.
Yeah, definitely. We saw, according to this account, one side relying on prep sheets, calculated jabs, stats without context. It was presented as pure optics.
And the contrast is stark. The other side, Congresswoman Crockett as described, responding not just with words, but with these deeply personal stories linking policy to actual lives.
The teacher, the grandmother, the clinic, real examples.
And, maybe most crucially, countering those calculated attacks with granular, undeniable legislative knowledge. Referencing footnote C, saying, I wrote it.
That detail is just incredible as presented in the source. It shifted everything.
The source describes that shift in the room from just paying attention to discomfort, then this dawning recognition, and finally that genuine ovation.
And the narrative attributes it not to performance, but to what it calls truth lived.
Yeah. The themes that emerge are visibility, representation, speaking truth, even when it's tough or goes against the script.
It really sets up this dichotomy. like leadership as performance versus leadership as responsibility, just showing up authentically.
The account also mentions how quickly it all went viral. Those specific quotes really resonated online, didn't they?
You didn't read it, I wrote it, and if you came for the athletes, I came for truth.
Yeah.
Very memorable.
Ultimately, this source frames the whole event as this collision: entitlement versus earned experience, assumption versus deep preparation, loudness versus truth.
It's presented as a reminder that even in a world that loves spectacle, substance can cut through. It can command attention.
And this narrative, she came for truth, it kind of leaves us and leaves you, the listener, with a final thought, a question prompted by the source itself.
What truth are you holding back that maybe, just maybe, the world needs to hear?